Listen closely, my dear friends. There is a kind of power most people mistake for weakness. It is the power to remain silent when every part of you wants to speak. Not because you have nothing to say, not because you're afraid, but because you've finally understood something most people learn too late. The moment you react emotionally, you hand someone else the steering wheel of your mind. Someone insults you and you immediately defend yourself. Someone misunderstands you and you rush to explain. Someone pulls away and you chase. Someone provokes you and you give them exactly the reaction they wanted. You think you're protecting yourself, but psychologically you may be giving away your power. Epictetus understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. What disturbs us, he taught, is often not the event itself, but our judgment about it. And between what happens to you and what you choose to do next, there is a space. That space is where your strength lives. Silence gives you access to it. But don't misunderstand this. Silence isn't about being passive. It isn't about accepting disrespect. And it isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about knowing when your words strengthen your position and when they destroy it. Because sometimes one sentence makes you look desperate, while silence makes your absence impossible to ignore. Sometimes explaining yourself gives someone more ammunition. Sometimes walking away says more than an argument ever could. And sometimes your silence doesn't just protect your peace. It changes the entire power dynamic. So the question isn't whether you should be silent. The real question is, when should you be? Because there are 9 moments when silence can give you more power than words ever could. And once you recognize them, you may never look at silence the same way again. The first moment you need silence is when someone is deliberately trying to provoke you. Because not every attack is meant to hurt you. Some are designed to control you. Someone insults you, questions your intelligence, mocks your weakness, or presses the exact button they know will make you angry. And instantly you feel it, that urge to respond, to defend yourself, to prove they can't speak to you that way. But pause. Ask yourself, what happens if I give them exactly the reaction they're looking for? They win. Not because their words were true, but because they successfully controlled your emotional state. And this is where Stoicism becomes real. Epictetus understood that you cannot control what another person does, but you can control what happens inside you after they do it. The problem is, the faster you react, the less time you give yourself to think. Silence creates that time. A few seconds where anger doesn't get to make the decision for you. A few seconds where you can choose your response instead of becoming someone else's reaction. Marcus Aurelius faced criticism, opposition, and people who misunderstood him. His strength wasn't in winning every argument. It was this: other people's behavior did not get to dictate his own. That's the difference between weakness and restraint. Weakness says, I have to respond because they challenged me. Strength says, you can challenge me without controlling me. And here's what makes this even more powerful. When you stop giving a provocateur the emotional reaction they came for, the game begins to collapse. Because they were never just looking for words, they were looking for access to your emotions. Your silence isn't surrender. It's refusing to give them that access. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, don't immediately ask, what should I say? Ask yourself, why should I let this person decide how I behave? Sometimes your strongest response isn't the perfect sentence. It's the one you never say. There is another moment when silence becomes powerful. When someone disrespects you and expects you to fight for your dignity. This is where many people make a subtle mistake. They think respect is something they have to defend with words. So they explain themselves, they argue, they demand an apology, they try to prove they are not weak. But the more desperately you try to convince someone to respect you, the more power you may be giving them. Because real self-respect doesn't always need an announcement. Imagine someone deliberately crosses a boundary. You tell them once. They ignore it, you explain again, they dismiss you. So you explain even more, hoping they'll finally understand. But stop and ask yourself, what if they already understand? What if they simply don't care? That changes everything. Seneca emphasized the importance of governing yourself rather than being governed by others. And sometimes governing yourself means refusing to spend your emotional energy trying to teach someone a lesson they've already chosen to ignore, because silence, in this situation, is not weakness. It is information. It tells them you don't need to argue about your standards. You simply live by them. You can step back, you can reduce their access to you, you can walk away, and you can do all of it without turning your dignity into a debate. Because there is a difference between defending yourself and begging someone to acknowledge your worth. The first can be strength, the second can become dependence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect isn't making someone understand what they did wrong. It's making sure they no longer have the same access to you. That's when silence stops being empty. It becomes a decision. A decision that says, without anger or revenge, I've seen enough. I don't need to argue with what your actions have already told me. And once you understand that, something deeper becomes clear. Not every boundary needs another explanation. Sometimes your distance is the explanation. There is another moment when silence becomes powerful. When someone keeps demanding that you explain yourself, you made a decision, you set a boundary, you chose a different path, and suddenly you feel pressured to justify every detail. Why did you leave? Why did you change? Why don't you respond anymore? Why are you doing this? Before you realize it, you're no longer explaining your choice. You're defending your right to make it. And here's the hidden trap. The more you explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, the more material you give them to argue against. You answer one question, and another appears. You clarify one detail, and they challenge another. Soon you're standing in an endless courtroom, trying to prove that your own decisions are valid. But who appointed them the judge? That's where silence becomes powerful. Epictetus understood that your peace cannot depend on another person's approval. If you know why you made a decision, you don't need everyone else to agree with it. Now, this doesn't mean you should never explain yourself. Mature people communicate, they take responsibility, they clarify when clarity genuinely matters. But there's a crucial difference. Communication seeks understanding. Justification seeks permission. And if someone has already decided that your explanation will never be enough, more words won't create understanding. They'll only create another opportunity to question your decision. Marcus Aurelius understood the importance of governing your own mind. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited into. Sometimes you make your decision. You accept the discomfort of being misunderstood, and you keep moving. Because constantly explaining yourself can become a quiet form of self-betrayal. You stop trusting your own judgment and start waiting for someone else to approve it. Don't. Let your actions carry what your words no longer need to carry. Because when you stop explaining every choice, something changes inside you. You realize you were never required to convince everyone. And that realization prepares you for the next moment. When silence becomes something far more dangerous to a manipulator, there is a moment when silence protects you from something far more dangerous than an argument. Manipulation. Manipulation rarely announces itself. It can sound like guilt. It can look like sudden anger. It can arrive as a dramatic accusation, a cold withdrawal, or a question designed to make you feel guilty for having a boundary. And your instinctive response is usually to explain yourself. That's where the trap begins. A manipulative person doesn't necessarily need you to agree with them. They need you emotionally involved enough to start defending yourself on their terms. They provoke. You explain. They twist your explanation. You defend it. Then another accusation appears, and suddenly you're trapped inside a conversation you never needed to have. Silence interrupts the cycle. Not because silence magically defeats manipulation, but because manipulation often depends on your emotional participation. When you refuse to react immediately, you create something extremely valuable: time. Time to separate facts from guilt. Time to let your emotions settle. Time to notice what is actually happening. And time to ask yourself, am I responding because this is necessary, or because I feel pressured to prove I'm a good person? That question can change everything. Seneca understood the importance of governing your inner state rather than allowing external events to control it. And a manipulator's greatest advantage is often your urgency, the feeling that you must answer immediately, fix everything immediately, prove yourself immediately. You don't. You're allowed to pause, you're allowed to think, you're allowed to leave a conversation that has stopped being honest. Because sometimes the strongest response is refusing to enter the emotional courtroom someone else has created. This doesn't mean becoming cold or suspicious. It means learning to recognize the difference between a conversation designed to solve a problem and one designed to control you. Silence gives you enough distance to see the difference. And once you stop reacting to every accusation, guilt trip, or emotional demand, something unexpected happens. The person who controlled the conversation suddenly has nothing to push against. But there is an even harder test of silence ahead. What happens when the person you care about becomes distant and every instinct tells you to chase them? Perhaps the hardest time to stay silent is when someone you care about suddenly becomes distant. Because when someone pulls away, your mind immediately starts creating questions. What happened? Did I do something wrong? Should I text them? Should I ask why they've changed? And before you realize it, you're chasing an answer from someone who has chosen distance. This is where silence becomes incredibly difficult and incredibly revealing. Because sometimes your desire to speak isn't really about communication. It's about anxiety. You send another message because you want relief from uncertainty. You want reassurance. You want to know that you still matter. But chasing reassurance creates a painful cycle. The more distant they become, the harder you chase. The harder you chase, the more powerless you feel. And eventually, you're no longer trying to connect. You're trying to escape the feeling of being rejected. Stoicism offers a different path. Epictetus taught us to distinguish between what belongs to us and what doesn't. Another person's attention, feelings, decisions, and willingness to stay are not fully within your control. Your response is, that doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means caring without abandoning yourself. If someone needs space, give it. If someone repeatedly chooses distance, observe the pattern instead of desperately trying to interrupt it. And if communication genuinely matters, speak clearly once. Then let their response or their silence give you information, because silence can reveal what chasing hides. When you keep pursuing someone, you can become so focused on getting them back that you stop noticing whether they're actually choosing you. Step back, and reality becomes clearer. You see effort. You see consistency. You see whether the connection exists because both people value it or because one person keeps carrying it. And this isn't about playing games or using silence to punish someone that's still attachment. Wearing a different mask, real Stoic silence has no hidden strategy. It simply says, I will not force what I cannot control. And that is freedom. But there is another kind of silence that demands even more discipline. The silence you need when your own anger is begging you to speak. Because sometimes the person you need to control most isn't the person in front of you, it's yourself. The most dangerous time to speak is often when you are angry, not because your feelings are wrong, but because anger can make a temporary emotion feel like a permanent truth. In that moment, your mind says, "Say it now." Defend yourself, make them regret it, tell them exactly what you think. And because the words feel justified, you believe speaking will make you stronger. But anger rarely asks what happens tomorrow. It only wants relief right now. That's why silence becomes a form of self-control. Marcus Aurelius understood that the first battle isn't against the person who upset you. It's against the impulse inside you that wants to surrender your judgment to the emotion. Imagine receiving a message that instantly makes your blood boil. Your fingers move before your mind catches up. You type the paragraph, you send it. For 5 minutes you feel powerful, then the anger fades, and now you're left with words that cannot be unsent. That's the hidden cost of emotional reaction. Silence creates a delay between emotion and action. And sometimes that delay saves you from damaging a relationship, your reputation, or the person you're trying to become. But don't confuse silence with suppressing anger. Stoicism isn't emotional numbness, it's emotional leadership. You can feel anger without becoming its messenger. You can acknowledge the emotion without obeying it. When anger rises, step away. Breathe. Let the intensity settle. Then return when your judgment is stronger than your impulse, and ask yourself, will these words solve the problem, or only transfer my anger to someone else? That question alone can prevent countless regrets. Anyone can retaliate when emotions are high. Anyone can send the message. Discipline is choosing not to. And sometimes when the anger finally disappears, you discover something surprising. You didn't need to say anything, you simply needed enough silence to become yourself again. But mastering your emotions is only part of the battle, because the next test is harder. What do you do when people underestimate you and expect you to prove them wrong? There is another moment when silence becomes powerful. When people underestimate you, someone doubts your ability, they question your intelligence, they laugh at your goals, they assume you'll fail, and suddenly you feel the urge to prove them wrong. You want to show them what you can do. You want them to regret ever doubting you. But here's the trap. The moment your life becomes a performance for someone else's approval, they still control you. You may be achieving more, but you're still reacting to them. Real strength looks different. It doesn't need an audience. Marcus Aurelius had every reason to constantly prove his position, intelligence, and authority. But Stoic strength was never about convincing everyone you were powerful. It was about becoming so grounded that other people's opinions stop determining your direction. Think about the difference between someone who constantly announces what they're going to accomplish and someone who says almost nothing and simply works. One talks about the new business, the new body, the new discipline, the new life. The other disappears into the work. Months later, the results speak. That's the difference between seeking validation and building quietly. Silence protects your goals from unnecessary opinions. Because when you announce every intention, you invite judgment before you've built anything. And if you're attached to people's approval, their doubts can slowly become your doubts. But when you work quietly, something changes. Your energy goes into construction instead of explanation. You stop asking, "Do they believe in me?" and start asking, Am I becoming the person I said I would become? That's the question that matters. So let people underestimate you. Let them misunderstand your quietness. Let them assume you're doing nothing. You don't need to correct every false impression. Your job isn't to manage everyone's opinion of you. Your job is to manage yourself. And when the results finally become visible, you won't need a speech explaining who you became. They'll see it. But there is one final level of silence. When saying nothing isn't about protecting your power at all, but about communicating something words could never express. Sometimes silence becomes powerful not because you're protecting yourself, but because words would actually make the message weaker. There are moments when someone already knows what they did. They know they crossed the boundary, they know they hurt you, they know they changed, and yet they wait for you to explain, argue, accuse, or demand answers, because your emotional reaction gives them something to work with. But silence can communicate something completely different. I have understood enough. That sentence doesn't need to be spoken. You see this in relationships, friendships, family, and even professional life. Sometimes someone keeps repeating the same behavior while giving you a different explanation every time. You can keep debating their reasons, or you can observe their pattern. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes practical. Epictetus taught us to examine things as they are, rather than becoming trapped in the stories we create around them. And sometimes the clearest evidence isn't what someone says, it's what they repeatedly do. Silence allows you to observe without immediately interfering. You stop filling every uncomfortable gap with assumptions. You stop forcing clarity from someone whose behavior is already giving you an answer. And that creates a different kind of power. Not dominance, not revenge. Clarity. Because when you're constantly talking, defending, questioning, and reacting, you can become so emotionally involved that you stop seeing the situation clearly. Silence gives you distance, and distance gives you perspective. Marcus Aurelius understood the importance of governing your own attention rather than becoming consumed by someone else's behavior. Your responsibility isn't to control their choices. It's to decide what their choices mean for yours. Sometimes that means speaking, sometimes it means setting a boundary, and sometimes it means quietly changing their level of access to you. No dramatic announcement, no final speech, no attempt to make them regret losing you. Just a decision. Because the strongest silence isn't designed to punish someone. It's the silence that comes after you finally stop needing them to understand. And now you can see what these 9 moments were really teaching you. Silence was never about having fewer words. It was about having greater control over yourself. When someone provokes you, silence keeps their behavior from controlling your emotions. When someone disrespects you, it reminds you that your worth doesn't need a courtroom defense. When someone demands explanations, it protects you from turning your life into a negotiation. When someone tries to manipulate you, it gives you enough distance to recognize the game. When someone pulls away, it prevents you from abandoning yourself just to keep someone else close. When anger rises, it gives your judgment time to return. When people underestimate you, it allows your actions to speak without needing their approval. When someone's actions reveal more than their words ever could, silence gives you the clarity to see the pattern. And when words would only make your decision weaker, silence gives that decision its full weight. But remember one final distinction. Stoic silence is not punishment. It isn't ignoring someone to make them anxious. It isn't disappearing to make them chase you. It isn't pretending you don't care. That's still emotional dependence. Real silence comes from a different place. It comes from knowing that you don't have to control every situation, to remain in control of yourself. Marcus Aurelius lived through conflict, pressure, betrayal, and uncertainty. His strength didn't come from controlling everyone around him. It came from returning again and again to what belonged to him. His judgment, his choices, his character. That is the freedom silence can give you. You stop reacting to every opinion. You stop answering every accusation. You stop chasing everyone who walks away. You stop proving yourself to people who have already decided what they want to believe. And slowly, something changes. The world may remain loud. People may still misunderstand you. Some may still provoke you. Some may still leave. But they no longer have automatic access to your peace. That is when silence becomes powerful. Not because it defeats other people, but because it prevents them from defeating the better version of you. So the next time you feel the urge to react, pause. Ask yourself, am I about to speak because it is wise, or because I am uncomfortable with silence? Because if you can master that moment, you've mastered something far greater than silence. You've mastered yourself. And that is a strength no one can take away from you. If this message gave you something to think about, don't just let it disappear. Tell me in the comments, which of these 9 moments do you struggle with the most? And if you're building a calmer, stronger mind, subscribe and continue with the next lesson.